The text gets called off. You see it. And before anything else arrives, before relief, before guilt, before whatever you're supposed to feel, there's a quiet exhale. The evening comes back. The hours open up. And somewhere underneath the no worries at all, something in you settles. You noticed that. You probably moved past it quickly, but that feeling, that specific, slightly guilty sense of the night returning to you, it's been there more times than you've counted. Not because you dislike people, not because something is wrong, because some part of you is always quietly hoping the world will give you back to yourself. That's not antisocial. That's not fear. It's something more specific than either of those words, and the reason it gets mislabeled so often is because the people doing the labeling are looking at the behavior from the outside. What's actually happening on the inside is a different story entirely. The text arrives. Plans canceled. Something came up. So sorry. And before the apology has finished loading, before you've even processed the words, something moves through you. Not disappointment, not frustration, relief. Clean, immediate, slightly embarrassing relief. The evening opens back up. The hours stretch out in front of you like a room you'd forgotten you had. And somewhere underneath the, oh, no worries at all, you're already typing, there is something close to gratitude. You don't say that part, but it's there. You felt it, and you recognized it, and you moved quickly past it because you weren't entirely sure what it meant about you. The thing is, it didn't feel like you were relieved they canceled. It felt like something had been returned, like the evening had come back to you and you could finally exhale into it. That question, what exactly was returned? That's the one sitting just underneath all of this. There's a word people reach for when they notice this pattern from the outside: antisocial. Sometimes they soften it: homebody, introverted, a little withdrawn. But the implication underneath is the same. Something is being avoided. Something is missing. The person who keeps declining, who exhales at cancellations, who seems most comfortable when the plans don't happen, they must be afraid of something, or broken in some direction, or quietly struggling in a way they haven't admitted yet. Picture this. Someone at a gathering, one they did show up to, gets introduced to a new person. The new person smiles and says something like, "Oh, you're the homebody of the group." Light, affectionate even, no harm intended. But something lands differently than the words. It gets filed away quietly, not argued with, not corrected, just absorbed. And it joins a small, growing collection of things people have said that don't quite fit, but don't get disputed either. The label isn't cruel, it's just wrong. And somehow that's harder to address than cruelty would be. You know the feeling. The word describes a behavior without touching anything close to the reason. And there's no natural moment to say, that's not what this is. Here's what the label misses entirely. For certain people, home isn't where they go to hide from the world. It's where they go to become capable of returning to it. There's a difference. It's not subtle once you see it, but from the outside, it looks identical. Research on introversion and cognitive restoration has been consistent on one point. Some nervous systems don't recover through social contact. They recover through its absence. The drain is real. The restoration is real. And the preference for solitude isn't avoidance. It's repair. But that framing still sounds clinical. What it actually feels like is quieter than that. You come home. The door closes. The specific quality of your own space, the sounds you chose, the silence you arranged, settles around you. And something that had been held at a particular tension all day begins to release. Not emptiness, not loneliness. The return of yourself. The version of you that had been performing presence, tracking conversation, staying legible to other people. That version steps back, and the one underneath surfaces again. That's not pathology. That is a particular way of being built. What people don't see, what the label homebody smooths over entirely, is what's actually happening in there. The book that's been open for 3 days, the thread of thought you keep returning to, the project that lives in a corner of your mind and gets visited when the house is quiet. The long, unhurried interior conversations you have with ideas you found interesting and haven't finished with yet. For people wired this way, the inner world isn't a retreat from meaning. It is a primary source of it. There's a texture to chosen solitude that ambient social noise never quite allows. The thoughts arrive differently, deeper maybe, or at least less interrupted. The attention settles onto something instead of spreading thin across a room. You already know what I'm describing. Not the idea of it, the actual feeling of an evening that belonged entirely to you. The specific satisfaction of following your own thread all the way through without having to surface and account for yourself. It wasn't nothing. It wasn't killing time. It was the thing itself. Staying in was never about what wasn't happening. It was always about what was, none of which changes what it costs, because it does cost something. And the script of this behavior, the quiet declines, the rescheduling that never quite happens, the genuine preference for staying in, has a long-term consequence that doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. Someone declines enough invitations, and the invitations begin arriving less frequently. Not as punishment, not dramatically, just naturally. The people doing the inviting start calibrating to what they've learned. They stop extending to someone who usually can't make it. And one day, without any single moment you could point to, you realize the social fabric has thinned. Not gone, just thinner than you noticed it becoming. The strange part is how it feels from the inside. It doesn't feel like something you did. It feels like something that happened. And those are not the same feeling at all, even when they describe the same sequence of events. There's something genuine in that discomfort. It deserves to sit here for a moment without being resolved. You can know that your preference for solitude is legitimate and coherent, and still feel something when you realize the world quietly adjusted to accommodate it in a way you didn't entirely ask for. Both things are true. That's the uncomfortable part. The people closest to you get it wrong too, maybe especially them. The friend who takes the canceled plan as a statement about how much you value the friendship. The family member who starts quietly wondering if something is wrong, if you're depressed, if you're pulling away, if there's something beneath the surface they should be asking about. The partner who experiences your need for a night alone as a comment on the relationship. They're not being unreasonable. They're reading the behavior through a framework that doesn't apply to you and reaching conclusions that feel true to them and foreign to you. What's exhausting isn't the misreading, it's the frequency of it. It becomes a pattern you carry. And here's the part that doesn't get said often enough. At some point, you start absorbing a little of what they said. Not consciously, not all at once, but the accumulation of being read as avoidant or sad or afraid. Eventually, some of it starts to feel like information. Like maybe they're seeing something you can't. Like maybe the relief you feel when the evening opens back up is actually masking something. Like maybe the preference is a symptom. It isn't, but the doubt lands anyway. And that, the quiet confusion between what you know about yourself and what you've been told, that's the thing nobody talks about when they describe this kind of person. Come back to that moment. The text, the cancellation, the exhale. That exhale wasn't about the person who canceled. It was never about them. It was about you. Specifically, about the version of you that exists when no performance is required. The version that emerges in quiet, that thinks differently in solitude, that has a relationship with its own interior world that is genuinely nourishing rather than merely tolerable. People who love staying home are not people who fear the world. They are people oriented toward depth over breadth, toward restoration over stimulation, toward a kind of meaning that lives inside rather than circulates between. That's not a deficiency. It's a disposition. What looked like withdrawal was actually orientation. What looked like avoidance was actually preference. What looked like something missing was actually something chosen, again and again, quietly, without much fuss, because it never required fuss to be true. You knew this already, in some inarticulate way. The script of your evenings, the texture of your solitude, The specific satisfaction of a night that belonged only to you. You always knew that wasn't nothing. Now you have words for what it was. The door closes. The sounds settle. Something returns. That was never emptiness. That was always you.